Hey everyone, quick disclaimer. Once again, I've decided to censor out a few words so that YouTube doesn't deem my video not advertiser friendly, too controversial, whatever it is. It's just a few words. You'll hear like beeps here and there. So that's what that is. I hope you can understand. But anyway, with that out of the way, let's just dive right into it. I seriously thought I'd just be making the one video on this topic, but Rock, Paper, Shotgun continues with the insinuation and argument that Cyberpunk 2077 is somehow overtly racist. In my last video, I talked about this article from The Outlet by Matt Cox titled Cyberpunk 2077's E3 demo has weak gunplay and unimaginative stereotypes. In it, the writer expressed his disapproval at some of the imagery he saw during the behind closed doors E3 2019 presentation. He apparently felt uncomfortable that the player happened to be killing predominantly black people in this particular demo, that many of these black people were part of a gang called the Animals who consume a drug called juice to power themselves up, that there is a Haitian gang called Voodoo Boys, and that the demo ends with a white man being right about a black man's betrayal. Now, if you watched my last video on the matter, you'll know that I've had plenty of things to say on the topic, and you'll also know that Mike Pondsmith, the creator of Cyberpunk, issued his own response to these kinds of notions. In one post, Mike Pondsmith provided some context about the naming convention of some of these gangs. He pointed out how the name Animals has nothing to do with race, but is rather a reference to this gang thinking of themselves as powerful, dangerous, wild animals. Honestly, didn't think this would need explanation given all the context the demo provided, given how clear it was that the Animals are basically the bodybuilding gang kind of. But there you go. Not to mention the Animals gang isn't just comprised of black people, it's mixed in terms of race. In fact, the leader of the Animals is a white female going by the name Sasquatch, a name that's also meant to represent this raw animalistic strength and agility. So this gang is all about striving for peak raw physical prowess, whether it be through training, through cybernetic enhancements, or through drugs like this so-called juice. As for Voodoo Boys, Mike expressed that the original gang from the 2020 tabletop was meant to be a scathing commentary on cultural appropriation, while adding that he loves the idea of the real practitioners of Voodoo, a real religion from Haiti by the way, moving in and taking back their turf. On top of all this, in another post, Mike Pondsmith expressed that he was getting pretty tired of people on the internet telling him, a black man, what he should be offended by. Now, as far as Rock, Paper, Shotgun goes, it isn't just the one writer who insinuated CD Projekt Red is reinforcing offensive stereotypes through Cyberpunk 2077. Founder of Rock, Paper, Shotgun, John Walker, offered his own take on the situation on Twitter. Attached to this tweet is an image showing Mike Pondsmith's response to claims that Cyberpunk 2077 is being offensive against black people, in which he explains the context behind the Animals gang nomenclature. In response to this quote from Mike Pondsmith, here's what John Walker had to say. I love an argument that says this can't be racist because the imaginary people we made up made the decisions. That's not even the friggin' point that Mike Pondsmith is trying to make with his response. He's not saying that this isn't racist because fictional characters decided to name themselves. He's saying that people are taking the word animals way out of context. For some reason, Rock, Paper, Shotgun's knee-jerk reaction when hearing the word animals is to assume the most offensive way the word could be used, when in fact the word animal can be used in the context of, damn, that guy is an animal, that guy is a beast. People use the term animal to suggest that somebody's very strong, very agile. Calling someone an animal can actually be a badass compliment about one's prowess, and that's why the Animals gang chose to call themselves that way. As Mike Pondsmith explained here, they see themselves as powerful, dangerous, wild animals. They're proud of calling themselves animals because they're proud of being the strongest of the strongest. It's got nothing to do with race, and the fact that John and Matt's immediate thought process when hearing the term animal was to go with the most racist interpretation says more about them than about the game. But it doesn't end there, folks. After inviting a wave of backlash with this, what I believe to be an asinine comment, John proceeded to add this to this string of tweets. Extraordinary work by the overnight Twitter goblins, those who spend most of their waking lives screeching about anti-white racism, suddenly changing their worldviews and believing it impossible that a person of color can make a bad argument regarding racist tropes. Yikes. First of all, so-called Twitter goblins screeching anti-white racism aren't the only ones who are rather baffled by your take and your statements. Take this reaction from Paris, for example. And Paris, for those who don't know, is the man who had that well-known, hilariously gleeful reaction to last year's Cyberpunk 2077 behind closed doors presentation. He was invited back to E3 2019 to check out this latest demo, and his reaction this year was just as enthusiastic. Paris, a black man who never once perceived racist undertones from the E3 2019 demo, gave his own take on John Walker's statement, stating the following. I assume you wrote the asinine article that started all this. Mike Pondsmith isn't imaginary. He's an African-American who created this world and characters of Cyberpunk, so who are you to tell him or myself what to be outraged about? I wish your clickbait was imaginary. As a bit of a correction, the one who wrote the article was Matt Cox. John Walker is the founder of Rock Paper Shotgun, but they're clearly both from the same outlet and pretty much on the same page. And these two white folks are convinced that Mike Pondsmith, a black man, the creator of Cyberpunk, the supervisor of Cyberpunk 2077, is being racist against his own people. As one appropriate Twitter response to John's post put it, Mike Pondsmith is gonna be so upset when he finds out he's oppressing himself. Now, John also brought up the point that it's not impossible for someone to make a bad argument about racist tropes against their own race. Oh well, then surely the white man here must be the expert of this subject and know more about black racism than the black man who's lived through 65 years of American history. Surely John here must be absolutely correct and is making an airtight argument by making light of Mike Pondsmith's explanations and insights in regards to why he named the gangs the way he did, and by speculating that the black man who created the cyberpunk universe is being insensitive towards his own people by using the word animal and by referencing the Voodoo religion in his own world. Look, I'm not going to say it isn't impossible for a black man to make a bad argument against racist tropes, but I'm sure as hell more inclined to listen to a black man about these topics of black racism than two white guys who feel the need to be offended for others when clearly no offense was intended or given. Maybe there is a small chance that a black man can give a bad take on black racism, but there sure as hell is a much greater chance that a white man will give a bad take on the topic. It'd be one thing if Rock Paper Shotgun had some tangible arguments to offer, but all they've done, in my eyes, is reach to make these asinine connections between Cyberpunk 2077 and so-called offensive stereotypes. They're looking way too deep into this and looking for any excuse to make a connection to something inappropriate. John Walker finished off his string of tweets with the following post. Although let's be fair to the dozens who genuinely didn't understand the difference between real and imaginary people. This is in response to how people have responded to John's first tweet by joking that John seemingly thinks Mike Pondsmith, the creator, is imaginary. People generally know what you meant, dude. You're making the argument that Mike Pondsmith is diverting blame to fictional characters, that Mike is trying to say, I wasn't racist, the imaginary gang was. But again, that's not even close to what Mike Pondsmith is doing here. That's not the point he's trying to make. Mike isn't scapegoating responsibility to fictional characters or trying to make excuses. He's explaining in very clear terms the origin of the name The Animals and how it comes from this idea that the gang is all about power. Because believe it or not, John, there are animals far stronger and far faster than us human beings. There are animals who can shred the average human to pieces without much of an effort. And this gang strives to reach that level of prowess, to be as fast as a cheetah or as strong as a bear, to go beyond normal human strength and speed, to become superhuman essentially. It's really not that complicated. It feels to me like John is the one who can't seem to grasp the difference between reality and imagination. This is an imaginary world where imaginary killing, imaginary gang activity, imaginary corporate scumbaggery, and imaginary government shadiness are commonplace regardless of race, and some of the imaginary gangs featured here are the animals who imaginarily boost themselves with imaginary cybernetics and imaginary drugs, as well as featuring imaginary cultish gangs like the Voodoo Boys, comprised of imaginary extremist Haitians who specialize in imaginary net running, among many other imaginary gangs of all races that will be featured in this game. And us as players, as the imaginary protagonist V, will probably be shooting at many imaginary people from these imaginary gangs, and those imaginary people will probably be shooting at us for all kinds of messed up imaginary reasons that fit within the context of this imaginary dystopian world that is cyberpunk. Look, I'm not trying to say that fiction or imaginary work can't be overtly racist or offensive. I'm saying that Cyberpunk 2077 is not one of these cases based on what we have seen so far. It is my belief that you, John, alongside Matt, are grasping at straws. I think the most imaginary thing right now is this connection that a gang named Animals is somehow an offensive attack on black people, that this all somehow equates to race or offensive tropes. Honestly, if you engaged in this level of scrutiny with last year's Cyberpunk demo, you could argue that CD Projekt Red was being anti-white people then, because in last year's demo, the player killed pretty much exclusively white people whose faces have been kind of like scooped out and replaced with cybernetics. Do you think there's a message there as well, something offensive there? Also in last year's demo, the person who happened to betray the player was this white corporate woman. Is there a hidden message there as well? As for this year's demo, yes, we did kill black people, but they are part of a freaking gang. They're not good people. It's not like CD Projekt Red went out of their way to go on a shooting spree against black civilians or anything like that. Yes, in this year's demo, it was a white man who was from this Netwatch government organization that warned the player about the Haitian gang member betraying you. And yes, that turned out to be right, but again, we are dealing with multiple shady organizations and factions in this dystopian world. Backstabbing and betraying will be commonplace, regardless of race. I should also add that Rock Paper Shotgun doesn't mention that there is the option of siding with Netwatch or siding with Voodoo, and we still don't know what would have happened if we would have sided with this Netwatch guy, this white guy. I'm sure he would have betrayed us in a different way. It's also worth noting that after the attempted betrayal from the Voodoo gang, they eventually do decide to team up with V and help V find out more about that chip inside his or her neck. Why wasn't that ever mentioned? Also, how about the fact that the black Haitian people in this game, the Voodoo Boys, happen to be basically the smartest people in Night City? They are the most talented netrunners and hackers? That's pretty badass. How come nobody's bringing that point up? Let me make one thing clear here. Based on what I've seen so far, Cyberpunk 2077 doesn't evoke the sense that it's a game about race. It is a game about factions, groups of people, characters from all walks of life who are living in a dystopian world, all of who have their own agendas, who understand that this is a world in which it's survival of the fittest, and who may resort to scummy methods if need be to achieve their goals, their agendas. And that includes the protagonist V as well. V has his or her own goals and will do shitty things to achieve that, because that's the kind of world this is. You have to get down in the dirt if you want to get forward in life, because this society is just shitty. And that's kind of the point of Cyberpunk. It is not an ideal reality. It's about trying to find humanity within all this muck and all this dirt and all this nastiness. Oh, and while we're on the topic of controversial representation, I'd like to shift gears a moment to that trans ad that's made headlines, that's caused some backlash. For those who missed it, I gave my take on that in my last video. I talked about why such an ad fits in a dystopian world like this, where switching out body body parts is so common and feasible that trans is actually far more accepted in this society, in this fictional world, than in our current reality, to the point where megacorporations feel like they can exploit hypersexualized trans imagery to market and sell their products. That's sort of the basic gist of what I said in my last video, but I do want to add that CD Projekt Red recently conveyed in an interview that they're working to ensure players can mix and match hairstyles, facial features, body type, and voice from either gender, thereby allowing players to essentially create a trans V if they so desire. I think that's incredibly cool, I think it's very fitting, and it's also one of the ways CD Projekt Red is showing that they are taking trans representation to heart. I understand that this doesn't necessarily guarantee that such a sensitive topic will be handled gracefully through some of the storylines we'll be experiencing in the final game. That obviously remains to be seen, but that's all the more reason to wait until the game's out, until we play it, and then we can judge how this game handles certain storylines, certain plots, certain thematic elements. I have no problem with people being concerned with wanting certain things out of a game, but to look at one or two vertical slices of a game, make these loose connections and tout offensive stereotyping, to look at one ad from this one screenshot and take it out of context or assume ill intent despite the world building and context that's been provided behind it, that's where I feel like we're going past the point of critiquing and just being plain antagonistic. And then when we start seeing tweets like these where a white man grasping at straws about offensive stereotypes and who's misinterpreting context and intent tries to explain to a black man what racism is, yeah, that's when we can maybe start having a discussion about what's offensive. I don't know, these are just one man's thoughts and opinions. This tweet, I don't know, I just found it particularly distasteful. I'd love to hear what your take is on all of this in the comments below. With that, I would like to end this news update and discussion video. Thank you for tuning in. To be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.